rise above the static, dissecting issues diplomatic. With mics in hand, they brave the storm of clashing views and norms transform. The Pundits Podcast, bold and true, shining lights on red and blue. Through heated takes and reasoned thought, they seek the truth that can't be bought. From climate change to foreign ties, they pause the spinning and sift the lies. No stone unturned, no topic taboo, as left and right come into view.
All right. Hey, everybody. This is Razib with the Conversation, number 15, with Josiah Neely. This will be our last conversation before the election of 2024. So we will have other things to talk about, presumably. Well, at some point, depending on how long the post-election stuff goes. I think maybe what we should do, Josiah, is just make a call if we want to record it before Friday, as we usually do, because obviously there'll be some days. Next week I'm going to be in New York. Actually, I did not tell Josiah this, but so funny story. I am at Hereticon, and we'll talk about Hereticon later, but I get a message from Pamela Peresky that there's a special election night party for her little heterodox group, and I'm invited in New York City. And I was like, whatever, I have stuff to do. The featured guests are Claire Lehman, and I knew Claire was going to be the stage. She was at Hereticon, and Razib Khan. So there was some miscommunication, but I looked at some other things.
You got to go, I guess. Otherwise,
there's some miscommunication, but I figure, I got some cheap discount airline tickets. I'll just take a small go for a week. So I will be recording from a different location, from New York City next week. Maybe I should do a meetup or something. But so that's what's going on with that, and I will talk about what happened at Hereticon behind the paywall. But right now, we got some garbage to talk about, I guess.
Yes.
That's how we're going to start. We're going to start talking about the garbage of the election, up to the, I've actually kept track less and less of what's going on as we're coming up to the day of the vote, although the vote is a rolling vote, I guess.
Right.
So it's kind of symbolic. I just I'm getting more vibes, actually. I mean, I will look at the data when the election happens, and actually, the Twitter personality known as Cremu, some of you may know, has agreed to do a quick after election podcast with me, because he is a statistician, data analyst, and we'll just see what's going on, see anything new or different. Seems like there are some movements afoot, it'll be interesting. Looks like also, so I'm going to just give you my vibe, and then you can talk about the garbage and how it impacts it. But it does look like the vibes are pretty good for Trump, but he's not running away with it. A tilt.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, we will have to see. I think there's I have some things to say about that. It's hard to tell in terms of what's going to happen in the election. It looks like there's an edge for Trump, but it's just so close. It's very close in polling. It's very close if you look at the different prediction markets or whatever. It's 60-40 Trump or something like that, right? In prediction markets. And that obviously you would prefer to be Trump in that circumstance than Kamala, but that's close either way. And part of it is, I think people sometimes talk about what's going to happen in the election like the answer is just written in a box somewhere. It's like the Academy Awards, and the presenters there with the envelope, but they haven't opened up the envelope yet. The reality, of course, is it really just depends on what people do on Tuesday, right? Lots of people make decisions on Tuesday. Do they show up or don't? And that's going to determine actually who wins. It's, as that great American statesman John Connor said, "The future's not set. There's no fate but what we make." Right. So that's kind of tough, and I think there is a lot of uncertainty. Probably that means, in fact, I think there's probably even it's hard. It's hard to say because the polling. If you look at the polling, Nate Silver had something on this. It appears that pollers are doing what's called herding, right? And what that means is, let's assume that the race was actually tied. With polls, you would still expect with a tied race to be getting Trump +4, Kamala +5. There would be more of a spread just because of random error, margin of error type stuff. And there are a few polls that are like that, but really it is surprising just how much all the polls are tied, Trump +1, Kamala +1, sometimes even like 0.05. And that is an indication, I think, that the pollsters, because a lot of the other thing about polling is that most people don't pick up the phone, right? Very few people answer polls, so they have to do all this waiting to try and get the actual results. And in the same way that in social science, people do p hacking or other things, pollsters can kind of like wait to make sure that their poll result looks normal. And
Well, yeah, okay. So let's be concrete about what's going on here. I mean, there are after election surveys; those have their issues too.
Yeah.
But you can also look at literally precinct by precinct results, and what the demographics of any given precinct is. So, for example, we know in 2020, Trump's higher than expected support from Latinos, from Latinx people along the southern border was due to turnout of people that hadn't voted before. They're just the population with the census just didn't match. You know what I'm saying? And so you can look at those correlations to try to infer a general demographic and model of who voted, who didn't, combined with, they used to have these exit polls. They don't have the exit poll consortium doesn't exist, but there are exit surveys. I think the national election survey is NES. There's an election survey that social scientists run post, and that has a bias because the person who won usually gets a higher percentage than make friends.
Well,
So you have to do some tweaking. But my point is, after the election, we'll have a much better demographic understanding. And so what the weights are trying to do is try to weight the poll. So, for example, like Latino men. There may be more Latino men for some reason than are probably going to show up on election day or whatever, or the other way around with older people, for example, tend to show up more on election day than I think they do in the polls because they just are. Oh, no, they show up more in the. Actually, no, I do think they show up more on election day. There are some groups that just don't answer as much, but are much more reliable at the polls and a little bit vice versa. So they jigger it back and forth. The problem, though, is obviously it's predated. Like the weights are based on expectations to the last election, and if there are changes in the underlying weights, it's kind of like a work of art to try to figure that out, and that's based on their own surveys, intuitions, what they're hearing, and other data points, right?
Right, and they have to use kind of rough demographic characteristics to try and do the weighting. So they can, if you're doing a poll in Michigan, you poll 1,000 people, and in Michigan, let's say 40% of people are Republican, 40% are Democrat, and 20% are independent. I'm just making up those numbers. Then if your poll responses are 45% Democrat and 35% Republican, then you might want to reweight that. But you're still assuming that the Republicans that answer are like the Republicans that don't answer, right? Which is maybe not true. So I think this is a problem in 2016 and 2020, especially in some of the Great Lakes states, is the support for Trump turned out to be really understated in polling. And the belief is that there's a certain type of person who just doesn't trust polls, that you won't answer pollsters, and they are not only more Trump friendly than average, but they're more Trump friendly than the type of person who's a Republican and does answer polls, right? You know, so even just oversampling Republicans doesn't correct that. So that's a general problem. And then if you know, so here it's a kind of variant of that where it looks like pollsters, they know that the race is supposed to be tied. If you come out with if you get a poll and it shows Trump, is +8 in Virginia or whatever, right? So it's just you're like a wild outlier. Sometimes you're going to get that just from random noise, even whether Trump is actually doing that well or not. But your tendency is going to be, well, I know that he's not really up by, like you're thinking, I know he's not really up by 8. Everybody else says that, he's down by 5 or whatnot. And so you're going to try, maybe give an extra eye to the weights and kind of skew it down a little bit. So I think that's probably what's happening with some of the polling. We'll find out. It's an uncertain race. That probably means it will be a close race. It's probably going to be a close race, but not necessarily, right? You could imagine within a certain realm, you could have a big swing one way or the other. So I don't know, that's just kind of the general state of things, I think. Garbage. Let's talk about garbage.
Well, garbage is like the random. Someone asked me recently, it was a Hereticon, what do I think about the garbage comments and what effect? And I was like, most of these comments have no effect, but in a small race, a bunch of small comments or a lot of no effect comments will actually have an effect. So
yeah. So one good thing about doing this podcast weekly is, a lot of political podcasts, some of them they do like every day or 5 times a week or whatever. And so we talk about things. Sometimes they're still in the cycle, but they've had a couple of days to mature. So the advantage of that is we can bring new angles to it that's not quite the same as everybody else. So I do have, I think, a couple of different thoughts on this. Just to catch people up in case you don't know, Trump had a rally in Madison Square Garden. I think it was over the weekend, maybe. And ahead of this rally, even before the rally happened, there was all sorts of talk in the media from Tim Walz and other people about how this was a Nazi rally, it's a fascist rally, racist rally. Anyway, during the rally, one of the speakers was this comedian, Tony Hinchcliffe, I believe is his name. He's a host of a podcast called Kill Tony. He's it's a stand-up comic kind of guy. And he's known as being like a roast comic, right? Meaning that he's just roasts people, insults, very edgy. And he had a joke in there I think it went something like, things are getting bad. There's an island of garbage just floating in the middle of the ocean. It's called Puerto Rico, right? Okay. So there was a firestorm about this, backlash, so on and so forth. And my view, a lot of people in chats that I'm in and whatnot, they were kind of wringing their hands about this and saying, oh, this is awful. It's a week before the election. Trump was looking like he was going to do very well with Hispanic voters. And now there's this comment that is alienating them. And to me, I think it's important I think there's a couple things. If you want to comment on politics, there's a couple things you need to do. One is you need to recognize that most people are not like you. Whoever you are, that's probably true. But particularly most pundits, they come from a particular class, educational, social background, and they tend to see things, I think, in a way that's a little bit different. If you come from that background, one of the things that you learn in education and in, that milieu is your sensitivity levels are just like maxed out. You learn a lot about, how to not say the wrong thing, and it's very important to you, particularly if you're a commentator. Words are very important to you, but not everybody is like you. Okay. Most people are not like that, I think. And I certainly think for the last 8 years, we've seen over and over again that Trump will make some statement and everyone will freak out about it and say it's horrible, racist, sexist, whatever. And then it turns out it just does not have any effect, on anything. And in fact, there's a kind of irony in that, like, people were saying, well, Trump is predicted, if you look at all the polling, he's predicted to do better among non-white voters than any presidential candidate since Nixon in 1960, right? So, like, 60 plus years, the Republican Party has not done as well as Donald Trump is going to do. And he already did, he did better, I think, than like 20 years in 2020, right? He had already improved a lot with Latinos and with Black men especially and whatnot. And so you have to ask, like, okay, how did he do that? Was he like particularly careful not to say anything offensive, or that could be perceived as offensive to different groups? No, that's not what Trump is like. The whole, like, from the very first, his announcement speech when he ran in 2016 and 2015, he had the comments about the rapists and, coming over the border or whatever, up through, this cycle, talking about Kamala Harris's, racial ethnic background and the Haitians in Springfield. This is just not him. So if that sort of thing was going to move people, if it was going to turn off normal voters, even like normal, regular,
That's like
it would be over, right? But so they don't care. All right. So this is, I think, a lesson, that journalists care a lot about this. White liberals, especially white college-educated liberals, they care about a lot about this sort of stuff. Nobody else gives a crap, okay? Nobody who matters. I mean, I'm sure there are people who were mad, but they were already mad at Trump and were never going to vote for him. And this is not even something that Trump said. It's something that some, like, comedian at a rally said, So it's totally, I was very much in the it totally doesn't matter thing. And then I guess act 2 of this is then Biden was giving he was doing something on video. It was kind of weird, but he said, he was objecting to this. And he said, the only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. And, which was taken to be like, he's calling Trump's supporters garbage. Now, there's been a huge controversy about that. People are like, no. He actually meant supporters with an apostrophe S, and then just didn't finish the sentence because he's got a stutter. I don't know. So, I mean, okay, so that's done. And, like, Trump and everybody, they've made a lot of hay about that. I've gotten emails about it. I think Trump dressed up as a garbage man and drove like a garbage truck that had Trump written on it to one of his rallies. So I think, like, on one level, I would say none of this really matters. I don't think it actually moves any votes one way or the other. Even the, like, let's assume, which I think is plausible, that Biden did call Trump supporters garbage, right? Which, I mean, it was a little funny to hear everybody in the media, like, try and defend Biden. It's like, no, obviously he would never call Trump supporters garbage. Like, after a week of everyone saying that they were Nazis and fascists and racist, yes, Nazis, they're Nazis, but garbage. No. That's too far. Okay. So that all doesn't matter, but I do worry about it. I think it might matter in this sense, is that we're in the last week of the election and everyone's focused on, like, the garbage stuff, which is something that voters don't really care about, I would submit. And I don't think it's just, I understand why you do it, but I think it's not a good closing message for the Trump Vance campaign, right? I think they need to really hit their core issues: economy, border, crime, right? Economy, border, crime. If they want to talk about some trans stuff, they can do that. If they want to talk about peace, conflict in the world, they can do that. They want to talk about free speech, that's good. I just feel like it's not going to hurt them, but focusing on the garbage stuff and all that, there's an opportunity cost, right? There's an opportunity cost. And this, I think, also ties into the fact that, like, why were they having a rally in Madison Square Garden in New York City a week before the election? And now, I think just yesterday, Trump had a rally in Albuquerque, New Mexico, right? And people will say, well, maybe Trump might actually do well in Mexico. He might even win New Mexico. I don't think he might. Maybe he wins New Mexico, but I will say, if he wins New Mexico, that's not going to be the pivotal state, right? Like, that's a landslide scenario for Trump. And so why do you do that? There does seem to be a strategy on the part of the Trump campaign that they feel confident that they can win in the swing states, and so they are trying to win the popular vote, right? They want to have a mandate. Some of it is about trying to help out congressional candidates, but some of it, they just want to be able to say, look, we didn't win on a technicality. We have, like, the country is really behind us, right? And I think, and the polls suggest that even if you look at the popular vote, it's very close. So that could be, that could be a strategy that works out. But my pessimistic heart, I worry about that. I worry that you could spend too much time trying to win the popular vote, which at the end of the day is not how we elect the president. And you could end up in a scenario where Trump wins the popular vote and Kamala wins the electoral college, right? If she squeaks through in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, that would give her 270, I believe, even if Trump wins all the other ones. So, that would be a kind of reversal of fortune type of thing. So, but I worry about that. I think at the end of the day, you want to win. And so, this is a risky strategy to try and, do big picture. But so those are I think the potential pitfalls, is just opportunity cost. And then, not like focusing like a laser beam on Pennsylvania. But I don't know. That's kind of my thoughts on it.
Yeah. So I just assumed, like, some people were saying Madison Square Garden because, they want Congress.
Yeah.
They want the congressional, basically, I think it was 2022, the Republicans did pretty badly. They under expectations. And so they got some pickups in New York, probably because the crime immigration issue. Probably they want to hold, maybe expand a little bit. Who knows?
Yeah.
One of the issues that I think people forget about is that Trump is. I mean, he's not totally, but he's a little bit of the Dick Hanania candidate. Kind of racist, but socially liberal. You know what I'm saying? I mean, so I think, like, him being at the top of the ticket and what he's doing to the Republican Party, I mean, people have pointed this out since 2016.
Yeah.
Moderated aside from immigration, a lot of the social issues have, like, been moderated. There's no talk about gay marriage. Obviously, that's a fait accompli.
Yeah.
On abortion, he is a squish.
Right.
On trans, actually, both him and Don Jr. are squishes. They're not Kamala Harris, that 2019, obviously. But
Well, the Jesse Single level type stuff, is that what you're?
yeah, well, Don Jr. has said it on Twitter that, like, he knows he's going to get crap from this, but if there's trans people that support the Republican Party, he supports, whatever. He doesn't support them, like, necessarily all the ways, obviously, but, there were trans people before. It just wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a big social cultural issue. So we have like we have friends. I mean, I don't know. You might be one of them. I don't know. But there's arguments. There's some people are just like all those surgeries or whatever should be just banned for everybody, right?
Right.
They're clearly not like that. Okay.
Yeah.
Trans people have been around with like surgeries and other things since we were actually before we were born. Although they've gotten better and more common, right?
Yeah.
So they're more like
there's what do you think about the issue in general, and then in terms of like, well, how does it intersect with politics, right? There's discrete stuff there about women's sports, about who gets to go in which bathrooms, and then about with kids, right?
Well,
there.
Well, this is on our like list. Whatever, we probably should talk about it. Did you listen to the JD Vance interview on Rogan?
So I've listened to like 2 hours of it. I haven't.
I had it on for 3 hours. I'm not saying that I listened for necessarily 2.
Right.
Yeah. I had it on. One thing is like JD Vance talked about live and let live, and he said something like how he thinks like maybe the normal gays will vote for the Trump Vance ticket, or as I like to say, the Vance Trump ticket. But anyway, JD is a social. He's positioned himself as a social conservative kind of, but even him, it's quite clear that he is channeling a more social libertarian aspect, and so the MAGA coalition, which is more downscale, more secular.
Yeah.
So we got Ryan Burgess, who you guys follow his Twitter. He was on my podcast a while ago. He has shown like there's huge swings since 2012 of secular white working class people. People don't go to church, never go to church, to the Republican Party. Yeah. And so these people, they're not flaming liberals, but they're definitely not church ladies. They got tattoos, and they drink a lot, they live hard, whatever. That's just part of the coalition now. And I think, anyway, going back to New York, Madison Square Garden, you're trying to signal, I think, to the nation what your brand is.
Right.
Okay. There's a nationwide brand signaling. If you do a rally in Woodstock, Madison Square Garden, whatever, somewhere like charismatic and salient, you will get national coverage. Trump does a lot of rallies, and the ones like in rural Nebraska or wherever don't get any coverage, no matter how big they are, no matter how many people show up. And so I think that's the key for people to realize as well. He's a showman, he's an entertainer, he's a celebrity. He knows that New York is the capital of the United States culturally.
Yeah,
he did a huge rally in New York.
There were a lot of big,
celebrities. Ish.
Hogan, Dr. Phil endorsed him. Tucker was there. Obviously, Tucker's already a big supporter.
Wait. We got okay. I feel like we kind of like scrambled the garbage conversation election prediction. We got some time here.
Okay, are we back to talking about demons? Is that
no? We talked about demons last week, and you were like a demon bear. You were like a demon bear.
Yeah.
I feel, and Tucker's like, I mean, okay. He was sleeping. He was scratched by a demon while he was sleeping in the bed with 4 dogs. I mean, not to be like.
I read someone. Okay, so for people who don't know, there's like a video clip. It's some documentary, I guess, and Tucker Carlson is talking to this guy about how he was attacked by he had a dream. He was attacked by a demon in his bed. And it's like, I was sleeping in my bed with my wife and my 4 dogs, and I woke up and there was like scratches on it, And so I went to go see it, and just randomly, it had the video, and then how it will show you like a comment like below the video sometimes,
yeah.
There was just a comment, and it said, "My brother in Christ, I think you were scratched by one of the 4 dogs in your bed, not by a demon." So I don't know. I wasn't there, but that does seem like a plausible alternative explanation. I'll just put it that way.
I mean, okay, like the thing is like I'm open-minded guy. I don't really believe in the supernatural stuff, quote unquote, officially. So I'm pretty skeptical. I think you do officially because you're Catholic.
Yeah.
That stuff does exist, but like over the last like couple of months or the 6 months, I feel the talk of like it's just become more socially acceptable
Yeah.
among a lot of Christians to talk about demons. And at this point, I'm just saying, like, where they be at? We got a lot of camera phones.
Right. Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, before
I,
it was hard to get.
I suppose that's true. Although,
Who's live streaming the demons? Who's live streaming the demons?
yeah, I mean, you will find, like, if you look for it, you can find. And I'm not saying any of this is legit or not, but like, if you look, you can find like plenty of videos on camera phones of like spooky stuff. People say that it's like demons or whatever, and I mean, people just like the general response in the same way that, and this is my reaction to Tucker is no, I don't think that actually happened, or like that's fake, or it's something else, or whatever. So, it is like it's hard to say, but I do think, as we discussed last time, some of this I think has to do actually with the weakening of organized religion, right? In terms of like, and Tucker says this, I think, in the little clip, after he talks about getting attacked by the demon or whatever, he says he started reading the Bible, which I think is great, but he said, I didn't want like to hear anybody else's words on it because I don't really have a lot of confidence in, Christian pastors and other things like that, right? For guidance. I just want to read it for myself. Okay. So I think there is a lot of that. Another issue, and I don't know that, like, I'm not saying that this is true in Tucker's case, but a lot of this also, I think, has to do with the rise of psychedelics, which have become a lot more popular lately with like elites or whatever, and people will, go on, like they'll go to Peru to do ayahuasca or do these other hallucinogenic drugs, and some people claim that when they're having these trips, they communicate with some sort of like celestial beings, right? Or I mean, people describe them different ways, as like elves. Are they like aliens, or are they angels or demons or something, right? Maybe it's just all in your head, but like, so people talk about that. There does seem to be evidence that like doing these psychedelics drugs makes people more spiritual, though not necessarily more religious, say, like more belief in the supernatural, that sort of stuff. And there are also like after effect. I forget if it was like Megan Fox, maybe. Like, I mean, she has some interview where she talks about like how she's doing ayahuasca and she went to hell, right? And I don't know if it's Aaron. I don't think it's Aaron Rodgers, but someone else is like, he did, like, he's been, you go and you do the ayahuasca trip and you come back, and then like later he saw there was like, you get like aftershocks or whatever. So there was just like some guy with a knife chasing after him. Um,
Yeah.
I think also probably plays into it in some cases, right? Is that people are just, they're seeing things because they've like,
Well, okay. Here's one thing that I have. You just made me realize something. Like throughout my whole life, throughout my many decades, I'm in the what is it, like the fifth decade of my life now. But I've talked to people who have become religious when they were not religious. They believe in God, they were not God. There's different categories of people. There's some people that are like, well, I like read the stuff in the Bible, then I looked at the universe, and I read a book on intelligent design, or I read Aquinas, and I was like, this. He's like, I just got convinced, like the teleological argument or something like that.
yeah,
It's not very common, but it happens. Those sorts of people. Or other people are like, well, like I believe like it's socially useful, and
a lot of people.
yeah.
I'm sorry. I don't want to interrupt you, but like a lot of people, it's just like fundamentally, it's like, people, I had problems, people were nice to me, and this is a way, I quit drinking, or like, whatever, right? So that's, I think,
Yeah.
part of it too.
Yeah, and eventually, some of them will be like, "Well, and eventually I believed," or maybe I'll believe someday, whatever. So this whole spectrum. And you have to say, I occasionally run into people who are like, I saw things, like I encountered a demon, I encountered an angel.
Right.
I'm gonna tell you, there's almost never people with like PhDs. I mean, I'm just saying, like the people who encounter the literal supernatural, a disproportionate number. Now I know there are exceptions to this, and like we know some of them that are very,
Yeah.
will
Right.
not be. But basically, like, okay, these are people that probably did a lot of drugs. Okay, they're not very well educated.
Yeah.
To be candid, they're less well educated, not as intelligent. They did a lot of drugs, and coincidentally, demons seem to just go for retards. I mean, it's like, I'm just like realizing this because most of the people who say things like they met demons or angels or whatever, or had like a really intense, vivid, vibrant conversation with God, not like kind of not like a more contemplative, low key one. Do you know what I'm saying? So there's like a socioeconomic spectrum here where, frankly, lower socioeconomic status people, less intelligent people, live in a more enchanted world. Now, I would say, as a more materialistically oriented person, that a lot of that just has to do with their perception of the world. Not that the world is any different. They just tend to see ghosts and demons in more places than people of our background. Whereas, like, you could, like, I guess if you take demons and ghosts and stuff seriously, you could say for some reason they tend to go for those people. And there are, I didn't know this, but like there's some of our friends that have said this, that, they're like, oh, Christians shouldn't be scared of demons because if you are a Christian and you're baptized and you go to church and whatever, you're protected. But there are a group of evangelical Christian, and you probably know this, who thinks that they're actually disproportionately targeted by devil and demons because they are like kind of like God's like soldiers, right?
Right. Yes. Yeah. So I guess there's different schools of thought about that. Also, I mean, and this is kind of a sad thing, but I have known two people actually who were very smart. One was a PhD philosopher, the other one was a lawyer, who had these sort of experiences, encounters, and in both cases, it turned out to be like schizophrenia, basically. And they had like breakdowns or whatnot, but they thought like, a friend thought that like Jesus was appearing to him, and that he could like see demons and cast them out and whatever. And the other, so I mean, maybe obviously there's that in extreme case, but I also wonder just in terms of like um natural variation, people who are
Yeah. Well, someone was it someone on Twitter? Actually, I think it was Dick and Anya. Was like, it looks like Tucker Carlson is entering his schizophrenic phase.
right,
Yeah,
right, yeah. Which
like it's not a joking thing.
Yeah, drugs can also interact with that and set it off. Although Tucker, I think, is much too old. Schizophrenia usually hits you when you're like in your teens or 20s, basically. Very nasty malady. But I do also, yeah. So I agree with all that, and my disposition. I mean, I will tell you, even though I do believe in the supernatural and all that stuff. In practice, I tend to be pretty skeptical the couple of times when I have encountered things that seem to be in that realm. My instinct was like, I don't know about this, and it turned out to not be the case, right? I do sometimes wonder though, like, there is I think a modern habit of mind which is just I mean, it's just very like it's very dismissive of all of this stuff. And maybe the reason for that is, okay, it just doesn't exist, right? But I think people have an attitude that, well, the reason I don't believe in this stuff is because there's not any evidence for it. And if I saw some evidence, but the reality is, if someone presented you with evidence, you would just dismiss it, right? Like if someone showed Richard Dawkins, like if Richard Dawkins was sitting there and like someone started levitating in front of him, he would not like My suspicion is he would not.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I guess that's real. He would just be like, no, this is fake somehow, right?
This might also apply to alien stuff, which I'll talk about. That was spoken of in Hereticon. I'll talk about it in the paywall section. Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I think one thing that I will say is so this is where like I'm gonna like see like there might be like a like the you have a more confident model in some ways than me of like kind of the grounding of the universe,
Right.
right? Like you think there's God,
Right.
you think there's angels. Now the issue is like that doesn't mean you think God is like butting his nose into every literal thing. So if like someone just came up to you and was like, "Hey, God just talked to me and he said, give me your bank account,"
Right. Yes.
you're like, "Okay, like I mean, technically that's possible.
Right.
That's possible."
Yes.
You're probably going to be like,
Hey, okay, have God talk to me directly.
you know, so it's like just because you think it's possible doesn't mean you think it's always happening, right? So the frequency people are saying. So that's like your perspective, I would say. My perspective is, you know, I'm generally skeptical of these sorts of things and like have naturalistic explanations. But, you know, even though I think everything is technically naturalistic, it's kind of like I understand that there's things that we don't know. And there's things we're going to discover that we're like, oh, like
Right.
that's the thing that we dismissed as like a figment or whatever that was actually real, but we had no way to understand it.
Mhm.
So I do give some credence to that sort of thing. And like, you know, this is like people have like, you know, thought crazy things or rejected plausible things. You know, that's how social cognition works. A lot of it is not what you see, but what you expect to see. You know, people will have like memories, you know, implanted and other things, and these happen. This doesn't mean, I mean, overall, I believe that the material world is pretty comprehensible. You
Yeah.
know, we have airplanes. Like, you know, I get an airplane. I get in a chair that goes into the air regularly in a sealed tube.
Right.
You know, science works. When we understand stuff, we understand it really well. And it's very possible to understand things. So I try to be like not try to be. I mean, I'm just like generally skeptical of irregularities being new phenomenons that people report to me, but some of them probably are. Like a small minority are. And you know, if I was like, you know, if I was Christian or if I was Hindu, if I had a pre-existent like model of the universe that's more fully fleshed out,
Yeah.
like you have a thicker model of the universe than I do. That's what I'm trying to get across.
Right.
Right? Like I have a thin model, so I have blank spots in there, and so you know usually I'm pretty skeptical, but people have to understand that what I'm really meaning there is like I just think we don't know certain things. Like you're telling me, well, actually, like the universe was started by God, who's actually a person just like us, and I'm just like I don't know if I believe that, right?
Right.
But I also know that we don't really know on some deep level what's going on here.
Right.
You know, like we have these models of the multiverse, and we have inflationary universe, and all these things. We have dark matter. You know, there's a lot of like mystery in the world, and you know, even if we eventually explain it in a natural way, it will seem, you know, any sufficiently mysterious phenomenon is magic. Like to paraphrase Arthur C. Clarke. And so we have to balance our skepticism. You know, like for example, the alien stuff, which I'll talk about later, it's a little suspicious how aliens just really like particular parts of the American Southwest. You know?
Mm-hmm.
So I mean that
Yeah. Well, this is another thing I think, and the alien thing I think is interesting because a lot of times this stuff gets framed as like people don't believe, you know, supernatural stuff. Like you don't, if you're a materialist, you don't believe in that. But there's no argument about that in terms of aliens, right? Because aliens are not supernatural.
well, we could talk about that. We'll talk about that later.
Some people do say, yeah, that they are.
Oh, we'll talk about that later. But yeah, so you know, I think this is it's interesting. I mean, you know, Tucker's I still find him quite entertaining, but it's just that his arc is quite interesting. And then the last decade, he's gone from Alex Jones is a joke to Alex Jones is my best friend or something. You know,
Yeah.
it's like what is going on there? But I mean, it's part of the whole arc of the GOP and going back to the started because I was talking about like Trump is pivoting to middle, being more socially moderate, more downscale, and I'm not going to say who it is, but it's a mutual friend of ours, who let me just say he used to throw big parties, and now he's not in our city anymore. So you know who I'm talking about now. But who's like very hooked in and connected with MAGA politics, although his involvement in politics predates it. He was involved in, like the paleo movement and stuff like that, just to give you guys a general sense. And he says, he and some other people are actually worried about this whole downscale shift of the GOP, because, it's not Romney's party anymore. Okay. And, we are losing. I just said we. I shouldn't say we because I don't want to be super partisan about that. But no, seriously. But the Republicans are losing. They are losing. The educated. And we love the educated.
Yeah.
Some of us. I was always like the human. What Dick Canania was an elite human capital problem. It's not like trivial. Like it's a real issue that's happening as we're swapping out people that were non-voters or marginal Democrats. And they believe in dumb stuff like RFK stuff. So I'm starting to get like I'm not paying too much attention, but I'm starting to get like a little concerned. I mean, the vax skepticism stuff again. Some of what I said earlier applies. There are bad reactions to vaccines. That happens all the time, actually.
Yeah.
But it's just empirically true that probably most of the public, basically like 90% of the health gains in the 20th century are vaccines plus antibiotics. And vaccines are probably a little bit more important than antibiotics because
maybe just like sewage system improvements or things like that.
Yeah. And so, I'm a little annoyed that we're talking about vaccines at this stage. I get why, because of the whole COVID thing. And so Howard Lutnick, who a lot of us Gen X, because I don't think the millennials, he's not a big figure for millennials because they were too young mostly. Maybe some of the elder millennials, but Howard Lutnick is the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, and he was on TV constantly for the first couple of months after 9/11. Most of his company, 2/3 of them died, of his employees, on 9/11. He had something about a kid's drop off that he had to do that day, so that's why he wasn't in the office and he didn't die. And he put up a fund to help out his employees' families. They did have to put a stop on the salaries. This is like a financial services company, so high salaries, but they did support their health insurance and do other things. And then he put up a fund for 9/11 families in general. So he had this kind of broad based, soft glow, profile. Now Howard Lutnick is in charge with the Trump transition team. He's a big MAGA guy now, and so he's resurfaced 20 years. It's definitely 25 years later, or more than 20 years later. He looks old. He was our age.
Age.
Yeah. And that's what we're going to look like in whatever, 20, 35 or 40. So he is getting into arguments about vaccines. And this is a big thing on the right. And I've heard it myself a lot. And it's just it's kind of dumb, and all it's going to do is probably convince a bunch of people not to take I'm from Oregon. I know a lot of people who don't take vaccines, who didn't grow up in a vaccinated family, and sometimes they get sick and people die and random things happen. Now, allergies, I mean, I've told the story I think on podcasts and in public before. Allergies do happen and they can sometimes be really bad. My best friend from middle school died of an allergic reaction to the anthrax vaccine during induction to the Marines when he was 19. And that happens every year, actually.
Right.
But we just accept that, right? And so I think what we're having happen here, what actually happened recently, because I talked to friends in science about this, they were actually kind of annoyed as to how we trust the science people. Sometimes they're hope you enjoyed the podcast so far. To listen to the rest of it, please go to Khanversation.substack.com.
Two minds met on a summer's eve, each with truths they long believed. Words flowed like a winding stream as hours passed in deep debate. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground in listening close They came to see a shared humanity. They spoke of justice, spoke of change, of history's weight and future's range. Their views at first seemed worlds apart, but patience bridged the divide. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. They spoke of justice, spoke of change, of history's weight and future's range. Their views at first seemed worlds apart, but patience bridged the divide. It's not about who's wrong or right, but understanding others' light. In civil discourse we can find ties that gently bind. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. As dawn broke soft on dewy grass, they smiled and shook hands at last. Two souls enriched by reason talk, united in respect. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. This folk song captures the essence of a long, thoughtful discussion between two public intellectuals. It emphasizes the power of patient listening, mutual respect, and the discovery of common ground. The gentle tone reflects the common understanding they reach after their debate. Would you like me to expand on any aspects of